JUROR B76. The attorneys are going to ask you some questions, and we're going to start with Mr. De La Ronda.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Bernie De La Ronda. I'm going to, with all due respect, refer to you as B76, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Okay. And you obviously filled out a questionnaire, so we have some information about what you know about the case. I'm going to follow up with some questions about that.
Okay.
You mentioned here that you wrote down, I guess, as best you could, what you recall. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I need you, for the record, to say yes or no, because I know when you said I could understand what you're saying, but that court reporter needs to have an answer.
Okay.
We
Yes.
could. Did you run out of room in terms of the lines that we gave you there? Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. It seemed just from reading it that you had more information, and that's what I'm going to try to ask you about if we could. Spend a few moments on that. You stated that, well, let me backtrack a second. What else do you remember that you didn't have an opportunity to write on here?
I don't know if I mentioned that in the news it showed that there was a gun involved, and I believe that was Zimmerman's gun.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't have it here, but
Yeah.
we can give it to you if you need to look at it. Okay.
I know he got injured.
I'm sorry.
You know, through the news media, he was injured in the head, so I saw some videos. He was a security guard, I believe, for that community. And I think, from what I heard in the news media, he had like an interaction with the young man, and there was like a struggle,
Okay.
and the gun went off, and then the young man died, and Zimmerman was injured through the struggle.
Okay. You also notated here that you saw a partial trial regarding, if I'm reading correctly,
Yes.
Regarding community funds raised to support Zimmerman's defense.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
I remember seeing his attorney arguing that, I'm not sure which judge it was, but that the funds being raised, I guess it was a question about the amount or where the funds came from, where like maybe some of it was in his account or he had access to it, something like that.
Okay. The end result of what you put here, and I didn't mean to cut you off, was there anything else you remember now that you've had an opportunity to reflect even more than from what this morning?
Not really.
Okay. And I gather from what you have gleaned from the case, you stated you had not formed an opinion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the reason I asked you, just one of the questions said if you have formed an opinion, you said no, and then the next question was, and sometimes it's confusing the way the questions were asked, you said if you had formed an opinion, you could set it aside. So if I understand you correctly, you had not formed an opinion.
That's correct.
Let me go back in terms of where your sources were of gathering this information, of obtaining this information. Was it on TV? Was it in the newspaper? Was it in the internet? Was it a combination? And I'll shut up and let you talk.
Just the TV.
Okay. And do you recall whether it was local news or national news?
Local news.
Do you recall what TV station in particular you would have been paying attention to?
No.
Do you kind of,
I
whatever one you want that
Yeah.
day?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you recall, was it at the time it happened back in February, or was it more recently?
It seemed like a year ago.
Okay. And do you recall whether it was just one time or whether there was a combination of times?
Combination.
Okay. I guess my question is, living in this community, did you kind of pay more attention to it since it had happened here in Seminole County?
Yes.
Okay. And because you mentioned you were, in terms of a pretrial or proceeding, right? I think you mentioned one of the defense attorneys was present making an argument to the judge.
Say that again?
You mentioned one of the attorneys you heard talking to the judge.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
With regards to the funds.
Yes, ma'am. So I guess, did every time that this case appeared on the calendar or in court, did you focus on it in the news that day?
No.
Okay, so it was just by coincidence that you happened to pick up on that one in particular?
Yes.
Do you remember any other proceedings where you might have heard about it on the news and then focused on that?
No.
Okay. And do you recall the attorney, whether it was Mr. O'Mara or Mr. West, that you saw arguing? Do you recall? I don't know.
I don't know their names.
I don't know if you can see him from where he is. I'll have him stand out. Okay. Okay. And other than in a court proceeding, have you heard him speak in any other proceedings outside court, like at a news conference or anything like that?
Yes, but I don't
Okay.
remember
Okay.
what was said.
All right. Do you recall how many times you would have heard him in a news conference talking about the case?
Maybe 3 or 4 times.
Okay. Do you recall at this time what Mr. O'Mara would have said about if he said anything about the facts of the case?
No.
Okay. Let me just backtrack a second. What you see on TV, do you always believe what people say on TV?
No.
Okay. And do you always believe attorneys when they talk on TV that they're saying what's accurate or not? Do you form opinions based on what the attorneys say?
No.
Okay. So the question is, if you, and you mentioned you saw Mr. O'Mara and on TV, if you get on the jury and then you go, wow, I remember Mr. O'Mara saying ABC, and you realize that that's not evidence in the case, can you disregard that?
Yes.
And even if it was evidence, can you rely on what the evidence happens in the courtroom as opposed to what Mr. O'Mara said in a news conference a month ago or 2 months ago?
Yes.
In other words, can you keep an open mind and agree to make a decision when everybody's here, the state, the defense, and the court? Can you do that?
Absolutely.
So you would not be influenced by Mr. O'Mara talking to the media when he expressed whatever he said?
No.
You can completely disregard that.
Absolutely.
Now, would you hold it against the state because myself or Mr. Guy or Mr. Manthak, somebody on behalf of the state, Ms. Corey, didn't have a news conference and said something in response to what Mr. O'Mara said? Would you hold that against us?
No.
That we didn't talk on the media on a daily basis?
No.
When you first heard about the case, did you form an opinion about the case one way or the other?
No.
And I apologize if I asked you this already. You mentioned your source of information was just local TV?
Yes.
Okay. Have you talked to anybody about it? Forget about the media right now. Have you talked to people about the case?
Yeah, my family.
Okay. Well, that's a normal thing. Did they express opinions about the case?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that and realize that we're referring to you as B76, so just don't mention your family members' names. If you could.
Okay. Well, our family's pretty, how do you say, open-minded.
Okay.
So a lot of our family members are like me, and they feel that everyone deserves a fair trial. And whenever we would hear something on the news, it would just be like, well, wait till the trial comes, and then we'll determine.
So I gather when other family members saw something on the news, then you all would talk about it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I realize all of you were trying to keep an open mind as best you could.
Yes.
But does somebody have an opinion, even if they stated, I can still keep an open mind, but my opinion is, he's guilty or he's innocent or such and such?
No.
Okay. So the
They
discussion...
if they said anything, it would be like, well, why was a kid out at night getting candy or, whatever. Something simple like that, but not forming, yet one way or the other.
You're saying you didn't arrive at the ultimate conclusion or opinion, but there were opinions expressed about whatever facts you heard.
Correct.
Okay. And I want to ask you a little bit about that. You mentioned somebody expressed, was it you or another family member expressed an opinion about why was the kid out late at
I
night?
think it was my daughter.
Okay. And was there any response from either yourself or your husband or somebody else in terms of, well, this is why maybe he was, or this is,
Probably, but I can't remember.
I'm assuming it, like in my house, when you have a discussion, people interact and everybody gives their opinions.
Yeah.
Was that what happened there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can't remember exact details. It was a year ago.
Sure. Okay. And were those conversations that were had at the, I'm assuming, dining room table, did those occur back then and not recently?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you found out, obviously, you live in this great country, that you got a jury summons. Did that bring some more further discussions between the family as to what was going on? What would happen? Whether you'd be lucky and get on this jury?
I had no idea it was today, you know.
Okay.
I just moved, so I wasn't really thinking, and none of us, we were all moving, so we weren't really thinking about this case.
Okay. So you had no discussions about
No.
the George Zimmerman case or Trayvon Martin or anything like that?
No.
Did any of the family members do any research about the case and include you in, like your daughter, went on, Twitter or whatever?
Knowing my husband, he probably did, but he didn't share it with me.
Okay.
But he's very detailed, so he may have.
Okay. How about, not recently, but at the time, back when it happened or since then, between, February and, let's say, a month ago, do you believe he did some research on the case just to find out more about the case?
He researches everything, so probably.
The question is, did he share whatever research he had done?
No.
Did he express an opinion about the case one way or the other?
No.
If you were to be picked on the jury and you're sitting there and then you're listening, you go, hold on, I do remember, even though I was honest when I was telling everybody that I did remember. I now, remember something. If that came into mind, you understand with the law that you can't consider that. Do you think you could do that?
Yes.
Other than family members, have you heard any commentary from anybody else in the community? Either at work or neighbors or, you're at a restaurant, somebody, the waitress or whatever tells you about the case. Have you heard anything else about the case from anybody?
I can't remember.
If what you put down here, as best as you can remember, was not accurate, it didn't match what evidence you heard at the trial, can you agree to rely on what the evidence is at trial?
Yes.
Okay. You filled out this questionnaire this morning. It's now, afternoon, almost evening, I guess we're getting to. Is there anything else that you can remember that you haven't told us already about the facts that you remember? Now you've had some time to think about it.
I think I remember something about his wife being in the media, but I think it had something to do with the funds again.
Anything else you remember other than that?
No.
Okay. You realize that in a trial, stuff that may have come out in the media may not come out of the trial.
Yes.
I'm assuming,
Yes.
right? Can you agree to rely on just the evidence that comes out in the trial and apply the law that the judge will give to you in arriving at a decision in this case? And obviously using your God-given common sense.
Yes.
And you do all that.
Yes.
Is there any question in your mind that you can be fair to both sides?
No question.
Okay. Disregard whatever media you've had?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I have a moment, Your Honor. Questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Romero may have, or Mr. West may have some questions.
Mr. West, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Afternoon.
Hi.
My name is Don West. I'm co-counsel with Mr. Romero on behalf of Mr. Zimmerman. How long have you lived here in Seminole County?
Since 1981?
Just as a child then, I guess.
Yes.
Do you usually read the local newspapers and watch the local television stations?
I watch the local TV.
Do you subscribe or have an opportunity to read the Orlando Sentinel on occasion?
I do subscribe to it, but it's mainly for coupons. So if I want to read something, I go online.
Would you access the Orlando Sentinel newspaper online, for example?
No, just like the highlights that are on Yahoo. I might read those once in a while.
So if you're looking for headline type information, headline type news, what's your source for that?
Usually TV. You mean on the internet?
Well, let's say you woke up and you said, what's going on in the world today?
TV,
And that would usually be a local news station?
yes.
Do you ever turn to the cable networks, CNN, HLN?
No, we don't have cable, we use antenna only.
The old school?
Well, it's a big one up in the attic, but yeah,
But you only get the local stations that are broadcast through the old style antenna?
that's correct.
So you don't have access to any cable stations at all?
No,
So locally, you would have the 3 major networks, or is there 4 maybe?
2, 6, 9, 35, 65,
Mhm.
27.
So your access to local news by television is pretty much limited to that?
Yes,
Okay. So to the extent that you followed the actual proceedings in the case, would it have been on one of those stations?
yes.
Do you think that you actually watched some of the hearings before, or just heard about them?
I watched some of it.
The hearings that you may have watched were the ones that you've talked about?
Yes,
The one that mentioned the money, that would have been something that you watched in person as it was happening?
yes.
Do you think you've watched any hearings since then?
No,
Had the news about this case caught your attention before that hearing?
yes,
Were you aware from the news when George Zimmerman was arrested?
yes.
And had you followed the news even before that?
You mean regarding other issues?
No, regarding this case, that you were aware of this case and that that the case was in the news before Mr. Zimmerman was
Oh,
arrested?
yes,
Okay. And you mentioned that you've seen Mr. O'Mara or heard him on television.
Yes.
Have you heard any spokespersons or attorneys for Trayvon Martin's family on television?
I've seen Trayvon Martin's family. I don't recall hearing their attorney.
By family, you mean Mr. Tracy Martin and Ms. Sabrina Fulton?
I think his parents,
Yes.
yeah.
Mhm. So you may have heard or watched a press conference where they spoke personally?
Yes,
Do you have any memory of hearing also one or more of the attorneys connected with the family?
no,
Do you recognize anyone here in the courtroom that you may have seen on television?
I'm not sure, but I think, is that his mom? No? Then no, I
Yes,
don't
ma'am.
remember. I'm not sure.
Could you estimate how many times you may have heard or read or talked about the case or some aspect of it since you first had it brought to your attention until now?
Well, are you counting times where they just announce like a brief 5-second something and that's it? Like, you know how sometimes they'll give you little tidbits and bits of something and
Something like hearing today on Zimmerman?
something like that? Well, if you include all of those, it could be 30 or more. But
Mhm.
actually, there's only one trial that I saw regarding the money. And as far as the news media, I would say less than 10 times. Actually listening to it for more than a few minutes, not just a 5-second flash.
Where you actually watched a story
Yeah.
about the case?
Yeah.
Was there anything in those stories that you now remember that kind of stuck with you? Any issues, any evidence in particular?
The main thing I remember is when it first happened, the media talked about the altercation, and the young man was shot, and that Zimmerman was injured.
Right.
That was the main thing that I remember.
Did you ever see photographs on television or in any newspaper you came across of Mr. Zimmerman's injuries?
There was a video of him during one of the news conferences that showed the injury.
And what was your reaction when you saw those photos?
I thought it's possible they were, in a fight before the gun went off.
Have you were you aware of some of the public events associated with the case?
As far as,
Oh, demonstrations and protests and such.
yeah.
Generally watched or knew about that on television?
Yes.
Did that have any effect or impact on you and how you were viewing the case?
No.
Were you ever asked to, or did you consider signing a petition in connection with the case?
No.
Or donate money?
No.
I may not have heard your answer if you gave it, so I would ask you specifically if, when you and your husband have talked about the case, if he's expressed his opinion to you.
No.
And have you expressed your opinion to him?
He may have overheard me discussing it with my son or my daughter, but not directly with him.
Yeah, I have just one minute. Thank you, ma'am. Only following up briefly from the comment that you talked about the case a little bit with your husband, but you'd also talked about it some with your children.
Mm-hmm.
Have your children expressed opinions concerning this case to you, how they feel about it?
Yes.
Have they reached an opinion as to guilt or innocence?
No.
Or as to the importance of particular pieces of evidence or that kind of thing?
No.
Has it been more of a general discussion of the case rather than staking a position one way or another?
We're all kind of on the same page. We listen to everything, but we don't believe what we hear on TV.
Mm-hmm.
We like to base our final judgment on the whole story, all the evidence. So that's kind of what they share with me is they'll say something like, well, what if that was your family member? And we discuss how things should be fair and how either side, you have to hear everything before you can base an opinion. And that's pretty much how my kids voice their opinion or
So-
discuss that case.
Even though you've been exposed through the media to lots of things
Yes.
about the case, you feel confident and comfortable with the idea that should you sit on the jury, your decision would be based on the evidence that comes in the courtroom.
Yes.
And if there might be other things you've heard, whether true or not, that would be relatively easy for you to sort out and make your decision just on what you hear right here.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. When council's ready, please approach.